a wealthy California family living the perfect life.
They were well-connected, very successful, wonderful people.
Until it was all shattered by unimaginable violence.
People slain in their own home on Easter Sunday. That was a shock.
This case was like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle.
The investigation would take detectives on a 3-year manhunt ranging from the farms of Fresno to international drug cartels to catch a killer driven by greed.
Some referred to it as Fresno County's crime of the century.
You just couldn't imagine the level of evilness.
April 21st, 1992. Around 9 a.m., police in Fresno, California receive a panicked call from the housekeeper of a local millionaire, 59-year-old businessman Dale Ewell.
Housekeeper Juanita Avita arrived at her usual time. She came into the house and she immediately noticed that a door that leads to the kitchen was closed, which was highly unusual. She went in and at that point saw Tiffany laying face down in a puddle of blood. She then ran over to the neighbor's house and the police were called.
Tiffany Ewell is Dale's 24-year-old daughter. When officers arrive, they immediately see she's been dead for some time.
When we first went inside, you could see as you walked into the kitchen the body of Tiffany. She was laying down with her head kind of pointed towards the southeast next to the dining room table. We surmised that she had been shot in the back of the head, just from where the blood was.
But when police search the rest of the house, they discover Tiffany is not the only victim.
There's a hallway that goes to the east from the dining room. And as we walked that way, it went into like a den or a study area. You could see the body of Glee. And as we walked that direction, you could see that the body of Dale was laying in another hallway just outside the den. He had a bunch of newspapers in his hand underneath him and around him.
They discovered it was not one death, but 3.
Tiffany, her 57-year-old mother Glee, and her father Dale have all been shot. But why would anyone murder a family like the Ewells?
The family was a very prominent family in Fresno County. They were well-connected, very successful, wonderful people, and by all counts, a happy family.
Dale was a retired Air Force pilot from Ohio, and Glee was a former teacher. They'd gotten married in 1961 and moved to California to start a new life together.
Dale was involved in airplane business and made a good living through that as well as through farming. His wife Glee was known for being involved in the community as a volunteer in different ways.
In 1967, Glee gave birth to their first child, Tiffany. Their son Dana came 4 years later in 1971. By then, Dale had become so successful that he invested in agricultural real estate. He soon amassed an $8 million fortune. Glee quit teaching to devote her time to philanthropy.
Glee was a community activist, just a wonderful person who did a great deal of volunteer work within the community.
Glee was a force of nature in a very nice way. She was an appointee to the State Bar Board of Governors. She also became the executive director of the Fresno Regional Foundation.
Everybody seemed to, in most circles, know either Dale or Glee. They were very successful in what they did.
But you'd never know the Ewells were millionaires by looking at them.
Fresno is a great community. We are based in agriculture. Everyone in the community is either a farmer, works for a farmer, or had family that was a farmer.
The Ewells had more wealth than most people in Fresno, and being able to fly airplanes and drive Mercedes and that sort of thing. But, aside from those kinds of trappings, I wouldn't call them a flashy family.
The Ewells did not flaunt their wealth at all. For the amount of money that they were worth, they were very, very conservative.
They made sure their children were given the opportunity to succeed as well. By 1992, Tiffany was a grad student at Fresno State, while Dana was studying business at Santa Clara University.
Lee's children, I gathered, were a bit different. Tiffany, their daughter, was far more quiet, reserved, but wonderful in her way, and Lee would speak glowingly about her.
She was just a very nice young lady who was reserved, did not have a ton of friends that she would socialize with. She was more family-oriented, but everybody who knew her seemed to like her.
Dana was clearly the apple of Lee's eye. She spoke with great passion about his outgoing personality, his intellectual capabilities, his business acumen.
Dana stood out as a intense, well-groomed, corporate type of young man.
Dale and Dana had a fairly good father-son relationship.
They were, by all counts, a happy family.
But now, 3 members of the Ewell family have been brutally murdered, and Fresno police are determined to find out why.
It was what we call a triple, and the fact that this was an affluent family in a decent part of town, and not your typical victims. So the whole unit responded out to this particular scene.
Coming up, if someone is targeting the Ewell family, could Dana be next?
We didn't know if Dana Ewell was still alive. We didn't know if he had not been massacred somewhere between their house and wherever he was. We just didn't know.
Millionaire Dale Ewell, his wife Glee, and their daughter Tiffany have been murdered in their Fresno, California home. And as investigators search the crime scene, the evidence begins to paint a disturbing picture.
A homicide scene tells a story, and this one told a pretty clear story.
The way the bodies were all spread out, it kind of gave us an idea on how the crime had gone down.
It was clear that Tiffany was killed first, that she did not know what was coming. She was just standing in the kitchen and got shot in the back of the head.
She was probably dead before she hit the floor. We believe that Glee saw this happen and actually saw the killer.
Glee then ran from Tiffany's killer, ran into a den that she was shot multiple times.
As she laid on the ground on her side, the killer stood above her, and she actually looked up at him and was trying to basically, I guess, say no. And he shot her again while standing above her.
She had her keys in her hand and in death had a look of fright on her face.
After shooting the 2 women, it appears the killer then ambushed Dale.
As he's walking down the hallway, the killer comes out from a bedroom and shoots him once in the head. And I think he was dead before he hit the ground also.
The blood has dried, which tells police the attack occurred some time ago. But was it the result of a robbery gone wrong, or something else?
There was a box of 9mm shells in the nightstand in the master bedroom. And apparently Dale had a gun that went with that, a 9mm handgun, that was missing.
The home had been ransacked quite a bit, and so the initial thought was that this could be a burglary. But upon closer inspection, there were a lot of inconsistencies with a burglary.
We scoured the house, every entryway, every nook and cranny that anybody could get through that house. No signs of forced entry, the way the drawers were opened and then closed. Burglars didn't do that. You leave them open so you don't touch them twice. It was, we felt, to make it look like a burglary had occurred and that Glee and Tiffany and Dale had interrupted a burglar.
In fact, the evidence seems to suggest that whoever did this was a professional.
Normally, we would expect to find just hair strands, fingerprints, a point of entry. It was incredible how little forensics was able to find in a 4-day inspection.
We really didn't find much of anything except the expended rounds. The precision of the shots, especially to Tiffany and Dale, one shot to the head, this is a hit.
But why would a killer target Dale and his family on Easter weekend? When investigators talked to neighbors, they learned the Ewells spent the holiday weekend at their beach house in nearby Pajaro Dunes. Their son Dana had returned from college to go with them.
We didn't know there was a family member missing until we did some interviews with some people who knew the family. We were concerned that maybe he's to be another victim.
At the time of the murders, Dana was a student at Santa Clara University. Law enforcement had to follow up to make sure that he was safe.
Thankfully, they find Dana safe at school. He flies back to Fresno to speak with investigators.
Dana had said he was trying to reach the family and couldn't.
He did not react in a way that one would expect. He didn't shed tears over it.
Didn't show any emotion. And part of that could have been shock.
Do you know of any reason why anybody would want your family dead? Nothing,
and he said that he didn't know of anyone who would want his family dead, other than saying that his father was involved with some pretty high-level individuals, and he didn't know if any of those people could have wanted his family dead.
Dana tells investigators he last saw his family 2 days ago at Easter dinner. He brought his girlfriend and her family to meet them.
He's dating at the time the daughter of an FBI agent in San Jose.
They invited them to dinner there at the beach house. So there's Dana and Monica, his girlfriend, and then her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Zent. It was apparently a great dinner, and then when they all left,
Dana went back with the Zents to their home. Dale flew home, and Glee and Tiffany drove home.
Dale didn't like all of them flying together or all of them driving together because he was worried that if something were to happen, he didn't want the whole family to die together. He wanted somebody to be alive.
Ironically, that meant Dale would arrive too late to save his wife and daughter. By the time he gets home, his family members have already been killed. But detectives find the timing rather curious.
Tiffany and Glee had gotten home first. When they got into the dining room, the killer was waiting in the family room just around a corner.
Approximately 30 minutes later, Dale ended up coming home through the garage. Why would a person who just committed 2 murders wait 30 to 40 minutes for somebody else to come home? That was very strange.
Coming up, investigators discovered that the Ewells had some powerful enemies.
These people were targeted to die, period. That gets you back to the question, who benefits by this hit?
Three members of the Ewell family have been murdered during the Easter holidays. Police believe the gunman had access to the house, but the sole survivor, the Ewell's son Dana, has an airtight alibi.
At the time of the murders, he's with the FBI agent's family, hours away from the Ewell home.
They checked out everything he had said, and he had been with Monica over in the Santa Clara area.
The autopsy report provides investigators with a few more cryptic clues.
The pathologist recovered the bullets from the bodies, and the bullets looked like something that law enforcement, at least in Fresno, had never seen before.
Some of the expended rounds that we had found in Glee had some really unique striation marks.
The detectives put quite a bit of work into figuring out what could possibly have made those striations.
The bullets turned out to be a match for the ones found on the nightstand in Dale and Glee's bedroom.
We believe that the killer knew that those rounds were there, used those rounds to load up his gun, and committed the murders, and then stole the 9mm also.
There are also traces of a strange substance.
One of the other things we found were microscopic little bitty pieces of yellow fuzz, if you will. Little pieces of yellow material on Glee's clothing. We didn't know what that was.
The evidence only raises more questions. But by now, the triple homicide has made the news, and Fresno police feel the pressure to come up with answers.
It was a case that, frankly, fascinated me. I watched it in the news. I reviewed all the media and wondered where this case was going to end up.
We had to find a motive. So they started to look into backgrounds of Dale, Glee, and Tiffany to see what they could find out. Talking to family members, talking to friends, talking to whoever, find out what they were into.
Dana spoke highly of Tiffany and said that she was a harmless creature and that he couldn't think of anyone who would possibly want to hurt Tiffany.
She was Daddy's little girl. She was very protected by her parents. She had apparently been in an accident when she was younger and received some trauma to her brain. And from everything we could find, she didn't have a mean bone in her body. There was no reason why she needed to be killed.
During the course of the investigation, authorities discovered that Glee hadn't always been an unassuming teacher.
Earlier in her life, she had worked for the CIA. And I went, wow, well, that's a big deal. So that was something they looked into. And it turned out not to be a covert type of position in the CIA. It was something a little less glamorous.
In recent years, she'd become an outspoken civic activist. Was it possible she'd made enemies of the wrong people?
Glee was in a position of power, serving on a high-level state bar committee, and was involved in decision-making that could have led someone to become very upset with her.
People do crazy things, and we didn't know if maybe someone who wanted to be a judge got passed over and just got fed up with it.
We had to eliminate those people as possible suspects.
As investigators dig further, they find out Dale was in business with some dangerous people as well.
He took over a business from a guy who went to prison.
The person who owned Western Piper apparently had gotten some problems with running drugs with planes, and Dale swooped in and bought the company out from under him. The detectives were wondering at the time, is he mad that he lost this business the way he did?
Were the Ewells executed on the orders of a drug runner?
There was a lot of territorial gang violence where gangs were fighting over where the lines were drawn for their territory.
We had the Bloods, we had the Crips, we have NF, or Nuestra Familia. We had an influx of Asian gangs when the Hmongs came into the Central Valley, and a lot of them settled in the Fresno area. But one of our biggest problems was the Bulldog gang. They've been a thorn in the side of law enforcement for a long time in this area. They were kind of independent from everybody else, and there's different sects. They really have no hierarchy. They fight each other. They've been a problem in the Fresno County area for a long time.
Gang murders were pretty much at an all-time high. I believe the murders that year were over 100.
Detectives learned that Dale's plane was stolen the day after the murders. They immediately put out an alert, hoping it might connect them to the cartels. But instead, the lead takes them somewhere unexpected.
Dale apparently had a plane at Western Piper who belonged to an attorney out of Las Vegas. And apparently the plane had needed some work done. The attorney had actually gone and got his plane. He went and jumped in and got his plane out of there. The timing was really bad on the attorney's part. That's something that they talked to him about. He was interviewed, and that was put to rest.
Fresno police have hit a dead end at every turn so far. But have they been asking the right questions?
All the possible motives, it really comes back to who's going to benefit from this.
Coming up, one name keeps coming back to the top of their list.
He studied billionaires. He wrote to billionaires. He asked for jobs with people who were billionaires.
Detectives investigating the Ewell family murders have been unable to come up with any solid leads, but they soon realized that they looked past one suspect a little too early.
Who stands to gain the amount of money that these people are worth? And that came back to Dana.
As the sole surviving family member, Dana stands to inherit Dale and Glee's entire $8 million estate. But is he capable of murder?
Dana's personality was completely the opposite of anybody in his immediate family. I would describe him as eccentric. When he was in high school, he would wear suits and carry a briefcase. He would flash money. He would buy girls that he liked expensive bottles of perfume. Everybody in the school was aware of Dana Ewell and his love for money.
He kept a collection of billionaires. You know, most kids his age are collecting baseball and football cards, and here he is. His idea of, collecting memorabilia was about people who had become billionaires and millionaires.
He studied billionaires. He wrote to billionaires. We even had some of the copies of letters. We refer to it as the billionaire collection.
He was clearly aiming for a position of prominence in the world and wanted to be regarded as a wealthy businessman.
Investigators have already confirmed Dana was nowhere near his family's home the day of the murders. But his behavior begins to raise suspicion, starting with the funerals.
He was very cheap about buying coffins for his family members, and the way he reacted at the funeral by treating it more like a social event than the way that you would expect any normal human being to act.
He was working the room. He commented on a lady's diamond ring. He was not acting like the grieving son. As detectives, that's where your spidey senses start to come in. Not only did he do that, but he didn't want to cooperate with us anymore. He actually got an attorney, and he wanted us to go through his attorney to talk to him, and which was really bizarre for a sole survivor of a family. When your family's been murdered, you don't want to work with the law enforcement agency that's trying to solve the case.
He acts even more strangely at the reading of the will.
Dana found out for the first time that his father had set up the trust so that he would not get any money until he was 35, which was more than a decade away.
He jumped up and he slammed his hand on the table and he said, "Why did my father do this to me?" And that shocked everyone. Dale's brothers, they said this isn't right, and they brought their concerns to Detective Souza and Detective Burke at that time.
Greed is a powerful motive, and police know that Dana didn't have to pull the trigger himself to be involved.
There are the allegations that young Dana Ewell wants to inherit $7 or $8 million from his parents. He's willing to hire a gunman to kill his mother, his father, his sister on Easter Sunday.
There was a lot of investigation to do up in Santa Clara regarding Dana and just finding out about him and what he was all about.
Classmates tell detectives they should speak with Dana's best friend, Joel Radovich.
It was a weird friendship because Joel was diametrically different than Dana. Dana, this arrogant $1,000 suit rich boy, and Joel, the scrubby, sleeps wherever he can find a place, rides a skateboard, new wave hippie type.
His whole contention that he wasn't really close with Dana and, saw him a little bit, but, they weren't really that as tight as people on campus had made them out to be.
Joel confirms everything Dana told them, but detectives soon discover that both young men are lying.
Now we've got two people that people say are really close, and they're both saying, no, they're not really close. And one of the detectives happened to see Joel driving down the freeway, and he followed him, and he was actually staying at Dana's house.
The hallway still had blood and gray matter from Dale's brain on the sides of the walls. So on a daily basis, Dana and Joel are walking past the blood and gray matter from Dana's father as if it's no big deal.
When we started to key on Dana and Joel as having something to do with the homicides, is when we decided to start setting up the surveillances.
For someone unemployed, Joel seems to be living very well.
Dana paid for Joel's helicopter flight lessons in Fresno and didn't even hide it. We were able to show that Dana withdrew $125,000 in cash, that Joel spent about $75,000 in cash.
But Joel hasn't spent all of the money on flight lessons. He's also bought several books that investigators find incriminating.
Books that we were able to discover that Joel obtained was a book called Hitman. It was how you do your job as a professional hitman. It was generally pretty well written, but it had horrible pieces of advice in it. One was, if you are questioned by police, ask, "Are you going to arrest me?" That's exactly what Joel did.
The manual also contains instructions on how to build a silencer.
That coupled with taking the flying lessons, I think he wanted to be an international hitman. I don't know. I don't think he had any other goal in life.
Coming up, investigators believe they've found their gunman. Now they just have to prove it.
We have to put together a really strong case because neither of these individuals had any history of violence.
After a year of investigation, Fresno police are tracking two suspects in the brutal murders of the Ewell family. Dale and Glee's wealth-obsessed son, Dana, and his best friend, Joel, who's been studying to be a hitman. At this point, gone back to school in Santa Clara, and Joel has moved to L.A.
The way they would get a hold of each other was to page each other.
Think back to the early 90s, so we're talking about people still using payphones, people still using pagers.
To keep tabs on the pair, detectives obtain a warrant to clone Joel's pager.
Every time Joel would get a page from Dana, we would get the same page.
There were a couple payphones located at a location not too far from where he lived, and he would go to that location. They were able to basically have all of these different vehicles following Joel and communicating over the radio as to who would take over next. And if you were an expert in surveillance and you were being followed by this group, you would never have known it.
When they started talking, we could send a detective up with a tape recorder in a backpack and go to the other phone and just act like he was having a conversation, hope to get Joel's side of the conversation.
The recordings seem to confirm police suspicions.
He referred to the three-shirt deal, meaning the three family members, and that he needed money and he needed to get out of town.
He actually said, "I want my money and I want it now," because things were stretching out so long. Dana was extremely careful on where he would go, what payphones he would go to, unlike Joel. So it was a little more difficult to get Dana's side of the conversation.
So on May 13th, 1993, investigators paid Dana a visit to try and rattle him.
So they decided to go to Santa Clara University and knock on Dana's dorm door. And Chris Curtis looked at him and said, "We know who killed your family. It was Joel Radosich." Dana then immediately shut the door in Detective Curtis's face.
As soon as we told Dana that we think Joel killed his parents, Dana leaves campus and paged Joel. And that's when things really started to ramp up.
The surveillance team follows Joel to a restaurant in Ontario, California, where they observe him talking to a bartender named Jack Ponce. Detectives want to know why.
Jack Ponce was about the same age as Joel. He and Joel had been friends since they were children.
We need to go and talk to Jack Ponce. Interviewing him was like pulling teeth.
Ponce denies any knowledge of the murders, but after several visits, investigators eventually get him to open up.
You mentioned that the 380. Let's go back to that. The 380 was yours. The 22 was yours. Actually, not the 22.
I remember asking him early on if he had a 9mm. He said no, he didn't. I think it was the 5th interview, finally. He goes, I bought a 9mm. I go, what kind of 9mm did you have? Oh, it's an 18-9. It's a really nasty looking gun. He said he had bought it to shoot squirrels in the attic, which was quite a gun to shoot squirrels with.
Ponce conveniently claims that the gun had been stolen. Hoping to prove it was the murder weapon, investigators compare several 18-9 barrels with the bullet markings from the crime scene.
It just turns out that this particular gun had a very unique twist in the barrel.
The criminalists then recreated the exact silencer that the book described, got an 18-9, and then fired numerous rounds through that silencer.
And that silencer is made with PVC pipe, and you stack it with tennis balls and steel wool. The striation mark came out. They were almost identical to the striation marks on the bullets that were recovered in Glee's body.
The test also explains the fuzzy material found on Glee's clothing.
The fuzz was pieces of tennis ball. The little yellow tennis balls.
Ponce is immediately arrested. It doesn't take him long to turn on Joel Radovich.
He basically spilled it that he had bought the gun, and for Joel.
Ponce says Joel told him exactly how he committed the murders while they were getting rid of the gun.
Joel made the decision to tell Jack what happened. Not because he was confessing, but because you're in this too, buddy, and you need to keep your mouth shut.
Joel said, I shaved all the hair off my body except for my eyelashes and my eyebrows so I wouldn't leave any trace, and I was sitting on a plastic sheet waiting for the three to come home.
There were so many different facts that Jack Ponce knew that he couldn't have known on his own through the media or from anybody but Joel Radovich.
That level of planning that went into the murders was just something that Fresno hadn't experienced.
Ponce even agrees to show investigators where to find the murder weapon.
Joel gave a bag of gun parts, the murder weapon plus the 9mm that was stolen from the scene, to Jack Ponce to get rid of. Jack said he had thrown the parts at a variety of places down in San Fernando Valley, and the barrel of the murder weapon, he said he buried it in a vacant lot in Reseda.
3 years after the murders, who knows at that point if an apartment building or a house has been built on that lot.
He's handcuffed and shackled. He looks down, he goes, right about here. 2 shovels full, we hit something. Started digging around, it was the barrel. You get that piece of information that you know, that aha moment when you go, this son of a bitch did it.
Coming up, investigators are close to making arrests. But will the rich kid get away with murder?
People will look on the outside and say, well, this will be an easy trial. It was not an easy trial.
Bartender Jack Ponce has confessed to participating in a plot to kill millionaire Dale Ewell and his family. And according to Ponce, 21-year-old Dana Ewell was the one pulling the strings.
He was really a turning point in that case, explaining how Dana devised the plan, how he recruited Joel, and how the whole case unfolded. There was an estate worth $7 or $8 million that he reasoned he would collect if there were no other heirs in front of him.
It takes detectives some time to gather all the evidence, but on March 2nd, 1995, the 2 remaining conspirators are finally arrested.
It took 3 years before investigators could arrest Dana and Joel. Part of that is Dana's alibi, backed up by an FBI agent.
We had to continue the investigation for much longer than would normally be done if the individuals were the types that had a significant criminal history. It would be difficult for a jury to find beyond a reasonable doubt that they committed such heinous murders.
It was 3 counts of murder with 3 special circumstances, so it was a death penalty case.
A string of motions and appeals tie up the case for several more years. Prosecutors used the time to build a stronger case.
This case was like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. There were 162 witnesses who testified in this trial. It was building block upon building block.
They laid out a very clear timeline of how Dana organized it with his friend Joel. He provided himself an alibi by going and seeing his girlfriend and having dinner with her family, and her father was an FBI agent.
In 1997, Dana Ewell and Joel Radovich stand trial. Prosecutors come armed with a money trail they use to argue that Dana paid to have his family killed.
We were able to show that Joel was given $125,000 in cash by Dana for no apparent reason other than tying him to the murders.
Joel wants to be a hitman. Then you look at Dana and he hires everybody to do his dirty work. Throwing the money out there.
Their star witness, Jack Ponce, provides the jury with all the details of the plot. But the defense argues that Ponce is an unreliable witness who is only implicating Dana in exchange for immunity.
Anytime a witness is given immunity, their credibility is going to be suspect.
Dana's attorneys took the tack that you can't believe a word that Ponce says.
His testimony was something I thought should have been inadmissible, but it was, Joel Radovich told me that Dana Ewell told him, and so you had what's called double hearsay. So the prosecution had to offer an exception, double exception to the hearsay rule there in order to introduce that.
While Dana may be guilty of choosing the wrong friends, the defense insists there is no actual evidence linking him to the crimes.
They had what you would call guilt by association, the relationship between my client and Joel Radovich. So they had, them living together after the murders at the Ewell residence for a while, the paying for helicopter flying lessons, guilt by association evidence.
After an 8-month trial, the jury finally renders a verdict.
It may have been one of the longest deliberations in a criminal case in Fresno County history.
We returned guilty on all counts and also guilty on all enhancements and allegations.
Some people cried, some people laughed, a whole range of emotions because it was such a long case.
However, there's one thing the jury can't agree on.
In California, it has to be a unanimous death verdict. This wasn't, so that left them with the only thing of life without parole, which is mandatory on a death case if the jury can't decide on death. I was extremely glad that I didn't have to sign that verdict as the foreman sentencing them to death. I was very relieved. Now, I had voted the death penalty, but I was glad I didn't have to sign that paper with my name.
To investigators, it's a fitting sentence. In his greed, Dana Ewell had been willing to do anything to become a billionaire. Instead, he destroyed his family and lost everything, including his freedom.
To see a family massacred and then ultimately by a child strips away a bit of the veneer of our comfort, of our society.
I really believe that Dana had a short circuit or a disconnect. He was arrogant. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. To this day, I have no sympathy for him whatsoever.
This guy's a perfect psychopath.
I have always thought, at least for Dana, that the worst day of his life was not the day that he was arrested. The worst day of his life was not the day he was convicted. The worst day was the day his last appeal expired. And now he knows every day for the rest of his life, his home is prison.